Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday, the Rules Committee met and reported a rule, House Resolution 1142, providing for further consideration of H.R. 6784, the Manage Our Wolves Act. The rule provides for consideration of the legislation under a closed rule. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to have co-introduced the underlying legislation considered in this rule today, H.R. 6784, the Manage Our Wolves Act, to return management of the gray wolves species to the states.
We had a big national debate about the direction of our country. According to exit polling, the top issue for voters was health care, and in particular, protecting coverage for pre-existing conditions. But that's not what the bill before us addresses. Nor does it involve immigration, another top issue for voters, or strengthening the economy, or combating gun violence. All of these are what our constituents just said was important to them. But instead of doing anything on any of that, we're here today considering a bill to undermine endangered species protections. Are you kidding me? Also, and get this, also last night in the Rules Committee, the majority placed a provision in the rule that would remove the privileged status of Representative Khanna's War Powers Resolution, H-Con Res 138. This resolution states that Congress never authorized the United States support of Saudi-led forces in Yemen and would direct the President of the United States to end his support. This measure is a privileged resolution under the terms of the War Powers Resolution, which provides that resolutions concerning the involvement of U.S. military in armed conflict have a direct path to the floor to be debated and to be voted on. The rules provided this privileged status because such questions are among the most important that the People's House can debate. Such privileged resolutions, or a negotiated substitute, have come before the House under Republican and Democratic majorities. Yet, with this rule before us today, Republicans have taken the unprecedented step of striking this privilege, preventing us from doing our constitutional duty, and foreclosing the only available mechanism to compel an up or down vote in Congress regarding our military involvement in the Yemen war. The U.S.-Saudi military campaign in Yemen has triggered the world's worst humanitarian crisis, prompting the late Saudi dissident Jamal Khashoggi to call for an end to the war. Published just weeks before his murder, Khashoggi's Washington Post column was headlined, and I quote, "Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince must restore dignity to his country by ending Yemen's cruel war," end quote. It is unconscionable for Republican leadership to take this unprecedented action to strip members of their right to bring such measures to the floor for debate. Mr. Speaker, what is the majority afraid of? We should be debating this.
You know, certainly there are a lot of important issues in front of us and things that we should and will be addressing. But I gotta say, as a representative of Central Washington and represent communities that deal with wolf populations on a daily basis, I don't think it's fair or proper even for my good friend to minimize or diminish the importance of the issue that we have in front of us today. And so with all due respect, the importance of managing wolves in our country deserves just as much attention as many of the other issues that my good friend from Massachusetts referenced. And also, as relates to the Khanna resolution, you know, just as you said, just a few short weeks, your party will assume the majority. They will have the opportunity, you will have the opportunity to hold the hearings, the markups, to take the votes, the all-important regular order that you continually talk about. So I'm looking forward to that. But forcing this type of vote on members in the remainder of this Congress, in my view, is just unnecessary at this time. And
Mr. Newhouse, you know, seemed to imply that it would be an inconvenience for us to have the House consider a measure on Yemen, and I'm a little bit puzzled by that. The reason why Representative Khanna took this step is because for months, while this terrible carnage has unfolded in Yemen, this House has done nothing. And we just learned that that the Saudi government was directly involved in the killing of a Washington Post journalist, and again, nothing at all. And the Republicans took the unprecedented step of basically derailing this privilege resolution. It is unprecedented. Over 100,000 Yemeni children have already perished because of war-triggered hunger and disease over the past 2 years. I mean, why is the Republican leadership stripping us of the right to debate? According to the UN, 14 million people in Yemen, half the population, face an imminent and catastrophic famine not seen in 100 years if this war is not ended. You know, why is the Republican leadership stripping our right to debate? I don't understand what you're afraid of.
The cattle and sheep these ranchers raise are their livelihoods. Every day, sun, rain, snow, they raise and care for these animals. And when a first-time mom is struggling to feed a new calf, the rancher nurtures them, sometimes even literally bringing them into their own home next to the wood stove to warm them up and keep the calf alive in the winter. A rancher wrote me earlier this year that 3 of her calves were attacked, and she described the attackers, described them as, quote-unquote, wild-eyed with terror after being mutilated by wolves. Just like this one you see here from a calf that was killed by wolves in Wallowa County, ripped apart. This rancher went on to write, "The rush of emotions one feels when you see an animal you have nurtured that's crying for help, panic in their eyes, searching for escape." She said no one wants to see that and described it as watching your worst horror movie in slow motion. This legislation that hopefully we are able to bring up because of this rule will get the federal government out of the way.
Congress's sole responsibility over offensive use of force is outlined in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Congress shall have power to declare war. James Madison argued that this power is fully and exclusively vested in the legislature. Yet today, House Republicans are attempting to avoid their responsibilities by sneaking unrelated language into this rule, which will prohibit consideration of a war powers resolution pertaining to the U.S.-Saudi war in Yemen. To be clear, they took a bill about removing gray wolves from the endangered species list in North America and included a provision prohibiting even just the discussion of war in Yemen. Yemen is the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet, with the UN saying that 14 million people, half the population of Yemen, are either experiencing full-blown famine at the risk of death by starvation as soon as the end of the year. Since 2015, U.S. forces have been backing the Saudi war by assisting in the targeting, logistical support, and refueling deadly Saudi airstrikes in a war that has nothing to do with fighting al-Qaeda. The Saudis are imposing a blockade to literally starve millions of Yemenis to death. If the U.S. ends its involvement, Saudi leader Mohammed bin Salman will be forced to the negotiating table to end his brutal bombing campaign and blockade of the food.
Nobody's afraid to debate anything here on the House floor. The fact is, though, that the U.S. is no longer providing the very support that the Kana resolution seeks to cut off, making this action unnecessary. It's based on a factually faulty premise. We are not involved in hostilities in Yemen, so the War Powers Act should not apply. As a result, even if this resolution passed both chambers, DOD would not need to alter any of its activities. So like I said again, in a few short weeks, the Democrats will assume majority. They'll be able to hold all the hearings and markups and votes that they want on this matter, and as it should be. So forcing this type of vote now, in the remainder of this Congress, in my humble opinion, is simply unnecessary.
Undermining endangered species protections isn't a national emergency. We shouldn't be prioritizing it today. And not only is this rule a closed one, as you've heard from our side over and over and over again, Republicans took the unprecedented step of removing the privilege status of a resolution that would have given us a chance to debate the United States support of the war in Yemen. We should be voting on this. People are dying every minute in Yemen. And our silence and our inaction means that we are complicit. You know, I've always believed that the United States stands for anything. We need to stand out loud and foursquare for human rights. There was a time when the issue of human rights was a bipartisan concern. But it's clear that this administration doesn't give a damn about human rights. And there are innocent people being killed every single day. Children who are riding to school in buses, where the buses have been bombed, where these children have died, have been murdered. And all my Republican friends can say, oh, you could take care of that, after January when you're in charge. We're just going to spend the next 3 days dedicated to the issue of gray wolves. I mean, really? I thought that when we came back, that one of the first items up on the agenda would be holding the Saudi government accountable. And instead, we got nothing. And not only do we get nothing, you take the unprecedented step of denying a member of this House the right that he has under the privileges of this House to debate this issue of war. This is so wrong.
While the focus of this legislation is wolves, a similar issue is playing out in Montana over the grizzly bear. The unnecessary delay in delisting species has, in this case, created unnecessary stress on the bears and impacted our communities.
In this rule, the wolves bear their fangs, not American wolves, but Saudis who are willing to sever heads, dismember opponents, and bomb the innocent. This rule is truly a wolf in wolf's clothing. By blocking a vote on whether America should continue to aid and abet Saudi atrocities, this Congress would remain an obedient lapdog to President Trump's impulses and not the watchdog for American values. The Saudi ruthless war in Yemen has created what so many have described as the largest humanitarian disaster on our planet today, and yet it continues. American support for Saudi atrocities is truly a stain on our nation with which so many of our country members are not familiar. But without American spare parts, American targeting, American weapons and bombs, and until recently, American refueling, this killing could not occur. My colleague mentioned the school bus. 40 little children murdered in August, and scrawled across the bomb that was there next to that bus were words that meant, made in America. That's the message that we are sending there. That's where American tax dollars are going. The Trump administration last week belatedly said it would stop refueling. That is insufficient. If we are to stop Saudi killing, we must stop all of the assistance that they are receiving. Now, of course, there has been attention on Saudi murders of late in a different area, about one person, about the dismemberment of an American resident, legal American resident, who was a leading journalist in this city. And after taking the standard Trump approach of denying everything and saying he accepted the lies and the denials of the Saudis, Mr. Trump dodged again by saying, quote, I'm going to leave it up to Congress. And so what is this Congress doing about the Khashoggi atrocity? Absolutely nothing. That's what should have been in this rule. It's to do something about the sanctions and the disclosure. 40 of us asked this past month for the administration to brief us on what they knew before Mr. Khashoggi was murdered and whether they warned him about that. And we have had a deafening silence in response to our request on that and on cutting off assistance to Yemen. Only news that even an audio of the gruesome murder of Mr. Khashoggi, we don't know whether it included the sound of the bone saw that the Saudis apparently used to dismember him. But even a murder will not cause some in this leadership to stand up to President Trump and this atrocious regime. I look forward to a Congress with the courage to end support for these crimes, to cease American sales to the Saudis, and to do something to hold Mr. Khashoggi's killers accountable. But to say wait until a much improved new Congress comes into session to do anything about it means that tonight and every day going forward to January 3rd, more children will be starved, will be victims of cholera, will be victims of bombings and blockades, when this Congress has the power to do something about it that we ought to exercise today by rejecting this rule.
Time has expired. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the President. Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To help steer the debate back to the issue on the agenda that we're considering today, it's my pleasure to give 2 minutes to the chairman of the Western Caucus, the organization that stands for finding solutions to the challenges that we face, not only in the Western United States, but all over the country. The good gentleman from the state of Arizona, Mr. Paul Gosar.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to urge support for H.R. 6784. Our federal wolf policy has gone rabid. From a policy standpoint, we're foaming at the mouth. As chairman of the Western Caucus, I've been trying for years now to return some sanity to the way the Fish and Wildlife Service classifies and manages our wolf populations on federal lands and otherwise.
We know what's going on in Yemen, so none of us can escape the responsibility we have to either endorse or ignore the suffering that's occurring there. Thousands of victims in Yemen, hundreds of thousands dying of starvation, and it's happening in some cases quickly. People living in their homes under a bomb die instantly. In other cases, the suffering is prolonged, badly injured, no medical help to ease the suffering, let alone save the life. But in the case of most, it's prolonged through starvation. Children not having access to their mother's milk, not having access to aid that is in the port but is getting bombed and it can't be delivered. That's happening every single day. With the authority of the executive branch of the United States government, it means that that suffering that's avoidable and hardly inevitable is being done in your name and in mine. This rule prohibits us from accepting responsibility as to whether we will condone or condemn or oppose that policy. We have no justification for failing to do our job. Let us debate. This policy of Saudi Arabia of inflicting massive civilian casualty and suffering, for what? What national interest of this country is at stake by allowing that to continue? And some, including me, may say this threatens our national interest, because our national interest is to defend innocent life. It's not to kill innocent life.
We need swift passage of this bill because the endangerment and the damage being done to local ranchers with their livestock, the endangerment to communities, people in their homes, out for a walk, is unnecessary and it's not right. We need these tools for local control so we don't have to unnecessarily endanger and harass rural Americans with regulations.
I rise in strong opposition to this rule that will deny members of Congress an up or down vote about whether the United States should be complicit in the war in Yemen. Let's be very clear. This is unprecedented. In American history, never has the Speaker of the House and the majority denied a member of Congress a vote on matters of war and peace. This is basically rendering ineffectual the War Powers Act. The War Powers Act was passed in a bipartisan fashion after Vietnam because our nation said never again are we going to make the mistake of Vietnam. We're going to make sure that if a member of Congress calls for a vote, that members of Congress have the Article 1, Section 8 responsibility to vote on matters of war and peace. And what the majority is saying, that if the President of the United States and the Speaker believe we should be in war, we should be in war. It doesn't matter what members of Congress think. That's what they are doing with this rule. Now, They are arguing that we are not complicit in the hostilities of Yemen to invoke the War Powers Act. But you read every article written on this in the international press or national press, and it starts with a simple line: the U.S.-backed Saudi coalition efforts in bombing. Of course we're complicit. Do you think people in Yemen don't think we're complicit? Do you think people in the Middle East or our allies don't think we are complicit? With due respect, Congressman Newhouse says, well, why not wait? Why not wait a few weeks until we're in the majority? Congressman Newhouse, Special Envoy Griffith and every report has said that 500,000 children will die. 500,000 children will die in the matter of months. They don't have aid. They don't have nutrition. And let's be very clear on what we're doing. While we're bombing the ports of Hodeidah, we are not allowing food and aid to get to those kids. And when history is written, they're not going to say Jim McGovern did this or Ro Khanna did this or Newhouse did this. They're going to say, how did the Congress not allow a vote while hundreds of thousands of kids were not allowed food and medicine? That's not the America that I believe in. It's not the America that so many Republican colleagues believe in. There's a reason that our founders gave Congress the power over war and peace, because we have to go and answer to our constituents. And I'll tell you something, there's not a single American who wouldn't want the violence to end and allow food and medicine to get to those kids who are going to face death if we do nothing. I plead with my Republican colleagues, please vote no on this resolution. Let's have a debate. Let's have a debate about the starvation and the killing going on there, and do the right thing for our Constitution and the world.
I encourage my colleagues to support the rule and its underlying legislation, again, H.R. 6784, the Manage Our Wolves Act.